Hello and welcome to our podcast at Get Legally Speaking. Our conversation today will be about cohabiting relationships and separation. I am here today with Miss Sarah Cooper from Thomas More Chambers in Lincoln's Inn in London. As well as being a highly experienced barrister in family law, Sarah specialises in complex international family cases and she's also a judge in the family courts. Thank you for joining us, Sarah.
Pleasure.
Excellent. Right, so we're going to go through some of the most commonly asked questions by the public on cohabitation, relationships and separation. So let's start with, the big elephant in the room where everybody thinks there's this common law husband and wife thing that exists, and it could be because they've lived together for long periods of time or because they've bought the house together but they're not married. So what is meant by common law husband and wife? So let's start there.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you're talking about this today because it's really, really important. 40% of people living in England and Wales believe that there is such a thing as a common law husband or wife. But I'm afraid, a bit like Santa and the Tooth Fairy, it doesn't actually exist.
That's a really high number, actually.
It's a huge number. Now, the reasons behind why people believe it, I'm afraid I don't know. My understanding from people much more clever than I am is that if ever there were a common law wife or husband, that was in fact phased out by the Marriage Act of 1753. So I would like to suggest that now is the time for some better public education. It simply doesn't exist.
Not even if you've lived together for 20 years,
no.
You're not married, there's no such thing as common law husband and wife.
It's that black and white, and everyone needs to understand that. It may be different in other countries. There are countries where if you've lived together for a few years, you may have a special status. There are countries where you can go and register your special status. This isn't one of them. So living with somebody, having children with somebody, it puts you in no better position than anyone else who happens to be sharing a home with someone.
Okay, well that's clear enough and as black and white as you're going to get, I guess, and it doesn't matter how many years you've lived together or, if you're not married, you're not married.
Yep.
Okay, so then we go on to you're not married, you're living together, your partner owns the house, is a sole owner of a house. So if you split up, and I know it's, a wide question because it's got a lot of deep, specifics attached to the situation, but what happens then? You're not married, they own the house, you split up, you move out. What can you get? What can you do?
Well, unfortunately, you may get nothing. That is the very stock reality in these cases. You may get nothing. There would be two types of claim you could make. The first is to say that you, as the adult, have in fact got some interest in the property, even though you're not on the legal deeds. Those sorts of landlord claims are very difficult and frankly quite expensive to bring.
Legal fees,
in legal fees. They're complicated. They're more complicated than a divorce would be. So anyone would want to think very carefully about bringing one of those claims. You would have to show that you had put either a lot of money into the property.
Almost as equal as or 20% plus sort of sufficient sums, really.
Large amounts. Or that you'd carried out a lot of work. So, if you happen to be a builder by trade and you had essentially been renovating a property, those are the sorts of cases. There are other unusual cases where people have succeeded, but it's a very, very complicated area of the law. The other possibility is if you have minor children with the person you were living with,
but not married,
although you personally may not be entitled to keep any of the house, it's possible that the children will be entitled to live there, and therefore you with the children if you're the one looking after them. And it might also be possible that the property or a part of the property is transferred to the children, but not to you as the adult.
Yes. And when we say minor children, below the age of 16?
18.
18. So
yes.
Before full-time education or 18?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, that's another clear-cut question, really. So the next thing is then someone will say, okay, how can I best avoid any problems if I move in with somebody and I'm not married? So that just in case, you just don't know what the future holds, if we split up, how can I best try and avoid big issues coming up on who gets what and how? And
well, that's a really sensible question. I mean, the first thing to say is I would hope that everyone, having listened to this podcast, would now understand there isn't such a thing as a common law husband or wife.
No protection in the
There's
law.
no protection in the law. So really, you would have to, it is a very good idea to seek other ways to look after yourself, because inevitably what one sees as a family lawyer is that problems only arise either when parties split up or, very sadly, when one party dies.
That's another huge area, isn't it? Good
Yes,
God.
absolutely.
If you're not married and you own all this, or you've been living together for years, or you've got lots of things and together, assets, and then that person passes away, their family probably largely has more claim over the assets than you do as a partner, potentially.
Well, I mean,
although that's another big question,
it's a big question. I mean, again, what it means is there is a very complicated issue to be resolved. It would be much easier if both of you had left wills. So that's the first thing that you can do if you are a cohabitee, is to make sure that you've got wills. The second thing is, if you do jointly own a property, then you should make sure that there is what we call a declaration of trust, which sets out how you own the property. So Hatti, as an example, between me and you, we could buy a property together. I could own 70% and you might own 30%. And that would all be set out in a formal document at the land registry called a declaration of trust.
Even if only the mortgage is in one person's name, but you've agreed that that's how the ownership should be. Yeah, so don't think that because the mortgage isn't in both parties' name that you can't do that. You can have a declaration of trust even if it's in one party's name.
Yes.
Quite easily, yeah.
I mean, you might have to sort of,
and it's not
take
a
that
very
into
expensive thing to do these declaration of trust. I mean, they're not thousands and thousands of pounds. If it's over a property that's been purchased, you know exactly what percentage should be owned. So it's very, very sensible to get something like that drawn up on any joint ownership.
Absolutely.
Of a property.
And possibly in relation to other assets as well if you're not married. I mean, if you bought some other expensive asset, maybe an expensive car, again, you might want to think about having a proper document. There's also cohabitation agreements. You could see a lawyer and try to get something drawn up. There is some uncertainty as to quite how they might operate in practice, but still it might set a good framework so that people understood what was expected.
Should the parties separate?
If there might be a separation.
Because people quickly forget, don't they? You move in and when things are going great, it's really easy to agree everything.
Absolutely.
But when things are not going great, and we see it all the time, and then people forget what was promised, and then people want more or think that this isn't fair and that's not right. And fair and right doesn't really come into the law in the sense that there's strict laws about how things should work.
Well, this whole area, certainly family lawyers are very interested in reforming. But there's been a lot of talk. There have been various reports by various learned bodies, including the Law Commission. I mean, at the moment, there is no clear plan by any government to reform cohabitation laws in a particular way, albeit that there is a general agreement that they do need reforming, because it is a huge proportion now of the
6
population.
million people in the UK,
Yes.
apparently, that's statistically, cohabit.
Yes.
That's a lot.
Yes.
That's a quarter of non-married couples. That's a lot. 25% of non-married couples cohabit.
Well, it's a huge number, and when you combine that with the fact that 46% of people in England and Wales believe that
you're protected,
absolutely,
you've got the same rights as a married couple, which you absolutely don't.
No.
Okay, so, I mean, and you split up. You've got no cohabitation agreement in place. You've got no trust of deed in place. You each go your ways. You've got children. One of the questions that people ask is, do I still have the same parental rights over my children if I split up and we're not married and I leave the house, or does it change? That's another big question, but just sort of the main headlines on that. As a parent, really, you have the same rights the whole time, do you?
Yes. I mean, in fact, in relation to children, there isn't really any difference between being married and not being married.
Again, another thing that most people don't realise, they think if you're not married, particularly men, we see a lot of men in these circumstances say, well, I'm not married and we have children, so I probably have no rights then over the children if I leave the mother of the child.
Well, the law changed in 2003 to mean that any person with their name on a birth certificate, any father who has his name on a birth certificate, automatically now has parental responsibility. So unless you are in a position where you don't have your name on the birth certificate, which would be unusual if you were living with somebody, then you do also automatically have parental responsibility, as well as the mother having automatic parental responsibility.
Whether you're married or not.
Whether you're married or not. If you were a married father, then you automatically have parental responsibility regardless of whether or not your name happens to be on the birth certificate.
Right.
So there is a minor difference, but I suspect in reality that's not going to affect that many people. So most people are going to find that in relation to the children themselves, that their rights are identical as to whether they are married or they are not married.
Yeah. Okay. And then we come on to people saying, right, we're not married, we have children, we've split up. So usually we commonly get women in this position where they say, well, can the father of the children support me in the same way as he would be expected if we were married? Or, what can I expect? What can I do about it if they're not?
Well, this is the real nub of the issue, because the financial rights against a husband or a wife are completely different to the situation on cohabitation, because on cohabitation the adults have no rights to make claims against each other in relation to maintenance, as an example, or also it would be very unlikely there could be any claim in relation to pensions. So let's say one has an example where you've got two teachers who cohabit and the woman gives up her job plus her pension in order to look after children, minor children. And 20 years later, when the children are no longer minors,
over the age of 18.
So they're both over the age of 18. The parties separate. There will be no child maintenance because the children are too old. The woman has no right to maintenance herself. Possibly she might have a right in the property. I think we've already touched on that.
Yeah.
Very complicated. But she will also have no right to a claim on the man's pension.
Just to be able to support herself in later years.
Absolutely. And it might have been the case that the man had been paying additional funds into his pension out of their sort of, common income. And she might have been happy for that to have been happening on the basis that she always understood that they'd carry on living together and that would provide for a better income for both of them in the future. But the sad reality is that on separation, as a cohabitee, you are in an extremely vulnerable position.
Yeah. Yeah, whether you're the man or the woman in the relationship
Absolutely.
makes no difference really, because you get sometimes in a relationship you get the woman is the main breadwinner of the family, and the woman is the financial hub, and the man sort of takes the other role.
And there are also many cases, as you and I know, Hatti, where in fact cohabitation follows divorce. So, as it were, people on their second relationship.
One, actually, yes. Think, so I'm not going to get married this time because this time I've been through the painful divorce.
That's right.
We're just going to all shack up, 2 children each sometimes. Most of the time they have children that do come and live, but we're not going to be married. We're going to start this brand new life and buy all these things and work it out.
Well, that is right. Now, of course, ultimately these are all decisions of individuals as to what they choose to do and how they choose to run their lives. But what concerns me as a professional working in family justice for the last 25 years is the lack of knowledge. Yeah. Because
from young people as well. You were saying about the schools, Sarah.
Absolutely. I mean, I would be absolutely delighted if school children just could be told this little message very quickly when they're of an age where they don't believe in tooth fairies in any event. They can also be told not to believe in cohabitation, giving rights. Can I tell you a little amusing story?
Yes,
which I was giving a seminar on a careers fair to my old school, and I thought I would just pop in some comment about common law marriage to remind the school children at this that in fact, as a public service announcement really by me, that there was no such thing as common law marriage.
They didn't even know what it meant though, probably.
Probably not, but I can tell you something, Hatti. The teachers standing at the back did, some of whom looked rather pale when I told them that in fact they had no rights and it didn't matter how long they had been in a relationship with their partner. So it's quite clear to me that this is a problem across all levels of society and all educational levels.
No, indeed. I mean, the statistics speak for themselves. 46% of people believe that a common law husband and wife situation exists. And I think, Sarah, that's something we certainly have to look at doing in taking this message, as you say, to younger children from school time, really, that if you get together with someone, that's lovely. If you commit to the future, that's lovely. But if you start having assets and liabilities together and you're not married and things turn ugly, I mean, imagine where parents help. We have lots of situations where the parents have helped the children buy a place with the girlfriend or the boyfriend and the relationship falls apart. And it's not the two people, it's not their money, it's mum and dad's money that now is stuck in a property.
Well,
somewhere.
That would be a good example of where a declaration of trust and some proper documentation would have helped avoid squabbles and disputes afterwards.
I have friends where in the past, years ago, they said, I can't get my girlfriend or boyfriend to sign that. They won't want to be with me. They'll think I'm being, stingy or, do you know what I mean? Like a bit of a Scrooge by saying, sign here to say you never really put all the money in, or you're coming to live with me, but you won't make no claim if things fall apart. I mean, that does exist as well, but the reality is if you don't, it can become really ugly, really messy, and actually the person that may have put some money, not lots in, can leave with nothing.
Yes. Well, this is the problem. I mean, I would always suggest if people are making big life decisions and there are issues around what agreements and what documents there's going to be, is that each of the people goes to get their own legal advice so they understand what their position is
The
prior to
implications.
signing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And everything obviously changes. If you're married, the landscape changes.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's brilliant. Sarah, that has been incredibly useful. And I know that we're going to do a part 2 and part 3 to this, because there are so many questions that we can really delve into and pull apart and add so much more information to, rather than sort of skirt over the top of them. So, all right, so don't forget to click and subscribe to our podcasts, and you can find us on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn by searching Get Legally Speaking. Also visit our website at getlegallyspeaking.com. Thank you very much for listening.